Hello and welcome to the Future of Being Human Unplugged. My name is Andrew Maynard. I'm a professor of advanced technology transitions I'm going to say that again, I'm a professor of advanced technology transitions at Arizona State University, and I'm also director of ASU's Future of Being Human initiative. Today, it is my huge pleasure to have the incredible Viktoria Modesta as my guest, and we should probably bring Viktoria in. Hi, Viktoria. So
Hello.
I've got a few embarrassing things to say about you just to introduce you so everybody knows who you are.
It's better
Victor,
that you do it than me.
this is the bit that I always hate when I do things. I wish people would just hurry on through it. But anyway, Victoria is a bionic pop artist, a creative director, a musician, a dancer, and a champion of future innovations. She first stepped onto the global stage, and I need to ask you whether this really is true, that this was really your first big global break. It may not be, but certainly in terms of my notes, you stepped onto the global stage with a quite stunning performance at the London 2012 Paralympic closing ceremony, which I believe you were there along with Coldplay. That's correct?
That's right. They were
Yes,
my backing band.
which is not bad. This was followed by her truly compelling and thought-provoking viral music and art video Prototype, which was commissioned by Channel 4 in the UK. In addition to her work as a performing artist, she was an MIT Media Lab Directors Fellow in the 2016 cohort, a member of the 2019 class of Young European Leaders, and she's an ambassador for the Accessibility Space Initiative Mission Astro Access. Victoria's latest project is with the Aurania Institute, and this tapped into a new frontier of body augmentation in microgravity through tech wearables and architectural fashion, which is something we'll get into in a minute. So, Victoria, again, welcome. This is fantastic to have you on the broadcast.
Thank
And,
you. Thanks
and
for
I've
having me.
and I've got to say, so this actually goes back to conversation we had with the astronaut Katie Coleman, which was a long time ago now, where we began to talk about your work and your thinking around the future and human augmentation and technology beyond it. And I've been dying to extend that conversation ever since that. So this is
Me
very,
too. Me too.
oh, good. I was going to say this was very indulgent for me, but I'm glad we're both together with that. So I actually wanted to start off with a video. So I'm just going to pop this up, and I want you to talk through what we're actually seeing here. So let's get this up on the screen. What is this?
Yeah, so this was my second opportunity of being in zero gravity. And, this was one step towards a more conceptual kind of way of being in microgravity and also like embodying it.
Hmm.
Um, And it's really interesting now that you're showing this. The first thing that came to my mind is that, wow, it's so challenging to take the conversation into a very sort of open, free thinking, creative area when it comes to the body and technology.
Yep.
There's so much, there's just so much stuff that just seems like immovable when it comes to, thinking about disability, thinking about technology and so that was just a very unique opportunity to really just leave all of that behind at home.
Right, right. So this was, correct me if I'm wrong, the second time you had been up on a parabolic flight?
Yeah, it was. I joined Mission Astro Access as an ambassador. I guess it's almost 2 years ago now. And they did the very first flight, which was really pretty historical because obviously the research around sort of alternative mobility in microgravity has been very minimal.
Yes.
Um, that's with the old thinking that you need classic Earth
There we
style
are. Yes.
mobility.
Yeah.
It's like-
So I was going to say in space is not only you need sort of two arms and two legs, but you also need to be a bulky white male as well, I believe. At least that was the
Right.
historical thinking.
Right. So that was really historic, and I had the pleasure of going up there with, some amazing ambassadors, like
Mhm.
people that, you know, even however much knowledge I have around sort of alternative body and ability stuff, even I was kind of surprised. These are
Yeah.
really high level folks that just taking their lives to the extreme. And
And we
so that
should
was the first. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say we should say a little bit about what Astro Access does, because I suspect some people listening and thinking this is just a way of getting people up into zero G, but it's not. There's a special part of this.
Yeah, there is. So, you know, the research around limited mobility or alternative mobility in
Hmm.
microgravity has been so small, and which so George Whitesides was one of the main people that kind of backed this project. Um, Bless him, just has such an infinite kind heart for doing things that just seemed like the right thing to do.
Hmm.
You know, so they interviewed a lot of different types of folks who are quite a lot of them are within the aerospace area already. Myself, the only artist on board, and really just to put us together on a flight and start the conversation around what is the reality of being in microgravity with these different types of physical conditions and augmentations, and what is the future? How does a nonprofit situation like that impact, you know, the larger scale of what the space industry is developing, how they're thinking, and also the public perception, because let's not
Right.
forget that, the image and the PR.
Right. So you were there as an amputee, and we should say a little bit about that. But also, there were a wide range of what you might consider physical disabilities with amongst people on that flight. And this is the thing that blew me away when I learned about it. Even the idea of sending somebody up into space who is blind, or into zero G who is blind, or like you've got an augmentation on one of your limbs. It seems like you were completely rewriting the norms of what is okay and what actually works up in that environment.
Yeah, and it was a lot of it was actually a pretty significant process of sort of getting into it, and um, getting to be part of that. And the reason why I got so incredibly excited is that, you know, being back on Earth and working within that space and advancing that conversation around the future of the body and ability, it's incredibly rigid, and you
Hmm.
almost feel like every direction you turn is like a glass ceiling. And I think that what's interesting about space is that you are entering a completely new frontier, a completely new environment, a completely, historically unconquered area where you can you can almost bypass a lot of the sort of um, narrow-minded kind of thinking that
Right,
exists back
right.
here, right? You can just be like, all right, let's just okay, if somebody's questioning, the intelligence or the ability, or are we ready for leadership from somebody, that has a disability, all of those kind of taboo questions, then we sort of bypass that, and then we're like kind of like, well, wait a minute, what does a person like that with that sort of physicality function like when it comes to being in space? And the results were incredible. I think we finished that first flight after tons and tons of experiments, everything that we could possibly do in the time that we had, with the understanding that if anything, for somebody that struggles in their daily life, really navigating the world that's just not built for them,
Hmm.
um, that just simply doesn't exist when you go up to
Right.
space.
Yes.
Your day of trying to find a ramp or a lift or moving yourself around or whatever, for some of the members that were there, who are in a wheelchair, it's like you push yourself with one finger
And you're
from
there.
the wall of the cabin and you're there.
Right. And one of the things that blew me away from this is just the realization that what is seen as a disability on Earth becomes an ability in that environment. But more than that, as you said, this could be a blank slate where we actually design zero G environments for people of all abilities rather than just the stereotypical old people that went up.
Absolutely. Well, also, some years ago, I had a really fun conversation with Professor Huher, professor of
Mhm.
biomechatronics. We were driving through the Jordan desert, and he was in the back seat, and we were talking about just, the casual kind of deep conversation um, of some of the things that we discussed, and we were like, I wonder how much of your body needs to remain in order for you to still get a sense, because all I could see
Right.
was his head in the back seat,
Yep.
and I was like, maybe the head, just the head is
He could be
actually
a
enough,
right, right.
you know, and and he has thought about this quite a lot, and we talked about the fact that a lot of the things like muscle atrophy and all these extra limbs and everything, the new type of astronaut for long distance space travel, I think, is going to be an entirely new archetype,
Right.
right? Because we just you just can't get away from the fact that the values that
Yep.
matter really change dramatically. So I really imagine a lot of people who don't find it that easy or that fun here in this vertical
Right, right.
vertical perspective environment. They'll be like, take me up to space.
Yep.
Why? Yeah.
And at this point, I don't really want to dwell on this too much because there's so much else that I want to talk to you about. But just for the people that are watching, give us a really quick backstory as to what your situation is and why you ended up on this flight with people with various disabilities.
Yeah. So, oh, I can see myself here. There we go. Um, so, it's interesting. Like my backstory really is sort of heavily dominated by my health,
Hmm.
and um, unlike a lot of the things that we hear out there of people bringing up their health and part of their journey, I think for me it was just like a very unexpected key to transcend hardship.
Hmm.
So I was born in Latvia when it was still USSR, and had an accident at birth, and it was really kind of kind of a challenging situation. And through doctor's negligence, I actually ended up having quite a lot of damage done to my left leg.
Hmm.
So then from age 6 till 12, I just had countless operations. I had lengthenings. I had, one thing is done and it's better, and then 10 other things follow that, that are not so great. So that was kind of like my journey. But, there's a lot of other factors. I didn't really get to participate in education in the traditional way. I was sort of shielded like a kind of a lab animal.
Hmm.
A lot of the time, really in hospital, kind of left with my imagination and,
Right.
Disney as my parent. So that
I
was
was
kind
going to
of
say
like my,
Disney actually did a pretty good job then.
you know, like love it or hate it. I think, you know, you can't underestimate the power of storytelling and somebody telling you,
Right.
look, things are
Right.
things are super weird. You through motivation, hard work, and really strong desire, you can totally like transform your reality.
Yeah.
And that was really what happened with me. So in 99, my parents immigrated to UK, and I went from like the extremes of hospitals and kind of quite surreal life where what I can only describe as a fairly psychedelic, transcendent, weird experiences, right? Where like later on in life, discovering things like the Vipassana sort of meditation, I'm like, wait a minute, you know, understanding your body and overcoming different things and sort of trying to find some sort of balance. I'm like,
Right.
that's all I did. you
Right.
know. So then I moved to UK, and I kind of got submerged in the London subculture scene,
Hmm.
which as as upsy and downsy and kind of rock and roll as it was, it was really powerful because it sort of showed to me the adult version of Disney, of
Hmm.
way of being, right? Humans who really explore their life in a very conceptual way, who go out to the fringes of experiences, whether it's with body, with style, with society, with just trying to really experiment with identity, right? And
Right.
sort of what that means. And that was all super, super useful. And then, you know, I got into a situation by my mid-teens where I was really facing another huge series of operations that were just never going to end, and it
Hmm.
was not really clear what was going to happen. So that's when I decided that, having the power to be able to design my own prosthetics in my
Right.
own part of my body and really just explore that away from the negative
Yeah.
kind of, let's just accept it, right?
Yeah.
So that was my
Right,
little.
that was the backstory, but I love that concept of being in control of your own body, designing your own body, and of course that's exactly what you've been experimenting with your prosthetics. I obviously through your art, but what I'm really fascinated with is how that has changed your thinking about tech in the future. Because in our conversations, you've really had a very profound perspective on how to think about the human body in a world where we can actually technologically augment it and change who we are as far as our body goes.
Yeah, I mean, I fell into that in a somewhat accidental way, right? Because what I followed was kind of this sort of, invisible passion and exploration and just wanting to figure out like what is the way to live life in a thriving kind of way,
Hmm.
instead of sort of trying to deal with this thing. And so by the time my prototype video got released, which was
Yeah.
after the Paralympics, which the Paralympics were definitely kind of like my first
Hmm.
mainstream kind of event. By the time that happened, it was really the power of um, the spread of information that I got in touch with people who are working on technology, with people who are working on a much more kind of advanced body modification ideas, who are just like, wait a minute, like you didn't realize that your entire like life philosophy like completely aligns with this whole thing, because for me it was very sort of evolutionary, instinctual. Like
Hmm.
I didn't really have that sort of thing. But I think that, the lesson there was just enormous
Hmm.
because it started making me see the untapped potential when it comes to technology and how we
Yep.
apply that on the body and our life. And also, you know, I ended up like giving talks at schools and universities and stuff like
Right.
that, which is so schools of architecture rather,
Hmm.
and um, and thinking about design and technology from a perspective of embodiment and really I call it hyper embodiment. It's a
Right.
kind of a
Right.
it's a thing that I've been exploring. When you are thinking about it from that perspective,
Hmm.
and which is really the opposite perspective of consumer lifestyle goods.
Right. So can you say a little bit more about that? Because that intrigues me. So it sounds like this is a process of taking control or taking ownership over your body, and sort of what you do with it and where you extend it, rather than somebody forcing onto you what they want you to buy into.
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly limited in how
Hmm.
much control we do have over our
Right.
body, right? But I think that in our conscious waking life, there is so much opportunity. And I think that, what it requires you to think in a non-rigid way and
Hmm.
not really be bound by, maybe even going to university and having like
Right.
really sort of like, there was at some point this kind of anarchic, chaotic way of how I think about things came really useful, right? Because
Right.
if you're not paying attention to different disciplines, if you're not paying attention to disparities between different classes and different things and stuff, you sort of get into this place where you're experiencing all of it and exploring all of it from a very human experiential kind of way.
Right.
And and sometimes people sort of push back on it and think, say, don't you know what the real world is? And other times people are like, well, hell yeah, because like that's how it should be, right? Like when I first went for a visit to all of the rocket
Hmm.
sort of facilities, the first thing that came to my mind was like, wow, look at this attitude and method that happens in these facilities where like no one really cares about, like no one is trying to do anything there other than just find the fastest, the best,
Right.
the most
Very, very
efficient,
narrow. Yes.
right? Very narrow. And I came in and I was like, oh my God, I'm like, I wish there was a place where people did that, for the research for the body, right?
Hmm.
Because there's just so much veil of like, the medical stuff and all of this stuff, and there's all these barriers, but like honestly, all of it is just kind of an illusion at that point.
Right, right. So let's run with that. And I actually want to get back to something you said earlier about this idea of sort of embodiment and that experience you had with somebody in the back seat and you could just see their head. So sort of what are the limits in your imagination here of body augmentation? At what point are we still enhancing who we are versus at what point are we at risk of losing who we are as we begin to redesign and re-engineer ourselves?
I don't really know that we really get into a situation where we're sort of losing ourselves,
Right.
right? Like one of the things that through my experience that I have learned was that the more intentional I had to get about the architecture of my body and the function and how I'm going to do this or that or how I'm going to do an experiment is that it forces you to look further on the inside of, well, if my body doesn't define me who I am, then
Hmm.
what does,
Yes.
right? And so I think it all actually comes down to motivation. And I think that, and not I'm hoping that the audience that's listening to this is kind of more familiar, but I think, kind of the difference between post-humanism and transhumanism,
Hmm.
right? I feel that there is a very there's a very wholesome way of thinking about technology and how, you know, we advance biotechnology and technology and our bodies and the world for a much more integrated, interesting experience,
Right.
right? And and then there is, the opposite side of the things where it's a much more of an egocentric sort of development, right? I want to live longer. I want to do this, I want to run faster. And I think all of that is great.
Hmm.
And but to me, it's functional.
Yeah.
And beyond function, you know, I think that with that kind of way of thinking, you're not really taking in the full picture of the possibilities.
I love that. And actually, I hear so few people take this approach because everything seems to be either functional or transactional. How do you increase efficiency? As you said, how do you go faster? How do you live longer? But surely that isn't the essence that makes us who we are as humans. There's something more to it. And I just listening to you as an artist and a creative person, I think that perspective seems so important in terms of getting to the core of what it is we're trying to do. What is truly important here?
I mean, it all comes down to, you know, the masculine approach in the world has sort of dominated, right,
You
historically.
don't
And I think
say.
that,
Yes. Yes.
and like that is simply that's what's happened. When you look at any field of futurism and design, um, and it isn't about men and women. It is about really just finding space and strength in the feminine perspective and approach to
Hmm.
life and world, right? And I do think that both men and women and any other identified gender is capable of that. It's
Right.
it's more about a human quality as opposed to um, sort of necessarily a gender. And I think that's something that I came across a lot during my work. And notoriously, a lot of my collaborations have been gravitating towards working with people of a similar mind.
Hmm.
Um, and and I think that Aurelia experiment really was infused by that. Aurelia was started as an initiative by Ariel, who's been running
Hmm.
the space initiative at MIT Media Lab, whose kind of values and heart is in just such a right place, and she started the Aurelia initiative to give access to as many people as possible to really, you know, she understood that the value in having this diverse kind of pool of minds is
Hmm.
that they're able to interpret the world and problems and situations in a different way,
Right.
right? And not many people are able to see. And so when I think about sort of the future of the human body and its interaction and culture, and I think that we're still hang up on the physicality. We're
Right.
still hang up on, like, what does this person represent in this space walking in with their body versus, what is this experience that they can bring to, a situation. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I know, and I love that because I think it begins to change the way we talk about technology and think about technology and think about the future. So just running with that, from your perspective, how do you approach thinking about advanced technologies? I mean, we're living in a world now where the things we can do seem unbelievable compared to what we could do just a few years ago. Whether you're looking at the abilities of artificial intelligence, whether you're looking at the fusion between that and robotics, whether you're looking at putting stuff into the body, whether it's brain computer interfaces or other things, whether it's even manipulating our genetics. Um, our abilities to do stuff are incredible, but then how
Are
do you
bonkers.
I yes, I think that actually captures it way better than incredible. But then how do you actually sort of bring your sort of sensibilities and visions and perspectives into that world? How do you navigate around that so it doesn't just become how do we use these technologies to make us bigger and faster and live longer?
Yeah, so from my practice, the things that have become really important is, one thing is to really make sure that you take time to step back and think about the larger implications of all of it,
Hmm.
from a human development perspective. And really just it kind of comes down to values, you know,
Yep.
like I have found myself just running off with a new creative tool or a new experience, that's just exponentially just stimulating and just like takes you out of the reality, and
Right.
you're just like, and there's only so long you can do that until you realize that you're not using this very sophisticated biological
Mm.
computer that
Yes.
you live in in a way that engages it, right? And so, I mean, it sounds kind of really cliche, but I have found that, you know, trying to connect the dots between some ancient knowledge and some ancient discoveries, and ancient science, and all the types of different knowledge and practices that exist within understanding the human body and psyche and spirituality and all of that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
It's incredibly important.
Yep.
It's incredibly important because, you know, while we're still living in this body, it doesn't matter how long you're trying to keep your attention outside of this physical experience and in something else, you will eventually realize that you have to come back and you have to deal with what's happening here because
Right.
ultimately it's an escape,
Hmm.
and I had a really fascinating conversation with a Buddhist monk up in Japan in Mount Koyasan, and he's a futurist, and it was just like a fascinating conversation, and you could tell that his idea and investment of how important it is to develop technology and artificial intelligence, all of that stuff, with the mind that it's there for a really long time. That's a
Right.
really different type of thinking than you get in Silicon Valley,
It
for
is,
example.
yes.
You
But
know?
but but that's bizarre. So yes, you take the Silicon Valley mindset, and it's all about sort of how do sort of a subset of humans live forever using technology. But nobody talks about the technology itself and how long that
Mhm.
goes, and the timescale with which it actually impacts and influences us.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that, a lot of people are fighting really hard to get this balance between,
Hmm.
it's like when people started creating plastic and when people started
Right.
creating food that's bad for you, right? It's like it's taking the longest time to
Mhm.
fight back from that and be like, well, just stop making it. Like, stop making the things that are really bad for you. And
Yeah.
I really feel like it's kind of similar with technology in a sense at the moment where, you know, it can be a very disassociative,
Hmm.
addictive experience, right? To have this kind of alternate experience. But ultimately, I think the part that I'm really excited about, and I keep finding peers that are kind of in that mind frame, is what happens when you integrate it? What happens when you
Yeah.
harness technology and innovation and design to sort of maximize the human imagination, the human
Yeah.
experience, the human lifestyle, and human interaction. And, you know, and also just like make it a lot more well-rounded, going back
Okay.
to masculine kind of feminine
Right.
approach. Um, I just had the most fascinating conversation with somebody at JPL who was talking about what it's like to prepare for a mission to search for life on
Hmm.
other planets. And the fact that you have to go in there without bringing a single microbe on your equipment.
Yep.
And I think that that really summarized the potential approach and direction of how much more empathetic things are potentially going to get, where it's no longer like, hey, let's just land there, let's bash everything out, let's stick our flag, we're here, you know, where we are starting to. It's really funny. It's like it's teach that situation in my mind was like that's a lesson how you can harness respect for a microbe on another planet that
Right.
we absolutely don't care about here, right?
Yeah.
So it's just
Yeah,
perspective,
yeah, and
really.
actually, so just listening to you talking, I can imagine people cottoning on to the phrase "forever technologies." And of course, we talk a lot about forever chemicals these days in terms of what we've done in the past has got a long legacy. But I find it fascinating, this idea that we need to stretch and expand our idea of technological impacts that go beyond just the current time, the current few years or the current generations, and have that respect for how these things play out over generations. I think that completely changes how we begin to think about these interactions. And then, as you say, when you begin to put the human at the center of the conversation rather than just say, what cool stuff can we do? I think things get really interesting there in a way that I don't often see.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like myself and other people, who are like kind of like minded, we just champion that as much as possible and
Yeah.
really try to, like, I think a lot of the work that I do is trying to bring back the attention and the focus on the fact that
Hmm.
if you lead with qualities first, if you lead with values first, then you end up in a very different situation, you know?
Yep. 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 Which I think makes absolute sense. And so actually, as an aside here, so quite a lot of my work is looking at how you develop technologies responsibly and ethically. But here at ASU, we've actually started looking at a parallel concept of principled innovation, which is all values based. And just listening to you talk, I'm feeling connections being made in terms of how do you put sort of human values and what is important at the center of what we do and what we build.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's really great. That's really great to hear that is what's going on, and I hope that through the sort of catalog of different types of work that I do, that
Hmm.
people are able to, whether it's a video in microgravity or whether it's,
Hmm.
some photos of some objects that were designed, I think the the message is ultimately the same, is
Hmm.
that you just need to open your mind. You need to open your mind to possibilities. No one should be shunned away from having, participating in this conversation, and that everyone's opinions are valuable, and I think we just really need a more kind of diverse way of thinking in this space, which I
Yep.
think, I think it would just bear fruits of a different kind, you
I,
know.
that would have been such a beautiful place to end this conversation, but I do have one more question. But I think
No
it's such an
problem.
important statement to make. So we're almost out of time, and I had so many things I wanted to talk to you about, and including that. In fact, I'm going to ask this question anyway. I've got a couple more questions. So one of the things that fascinates me talking with you, you've got your art, your performance, which is quite stunning. And it struck me talking with you that, of course, sort of we talk about your prosthetic, your leg and the technology there. But when I watch you perform, it's a whole body thing. You're augmenting everything about you. And this must be intentional, but I'm also really interested in how you see that intersection between how you perform and how you think about the future.
Um, Great question. I think that the performances tend to be like the very tip of the iceberg, and then
Right.
you just don't really see the iceberg. I think everything from every design decision to lyric to, all of the curation of the kind of brands and things that I work with, I think that everything aligns in a very similar way. I really firmly believe in a multidisciplinary approach when it comes to, um, how we manifest and showcase all of these futuristic ideas and culture. Um, I think that, for me, that's been such an important, it's been such an important area to sort of play in, because I get to go and explore all of the latest research and all of the amazing things that are happening,
Hmm.
and I get to convey that in a digestible, entertaining slash educational kind of way,
Right.
um, which which is really great. And I think I used to be kind of afraid a while ago that, um, what does it mean? Why am I working with an avatar, and then I'm working on music, and then I'm working on space, and but I think ultimately it's the same. It's kind of like it's a spirit and a sort of a belief that y your identity is very malleable. Your beliefs are really malleable,
Yep.
and that if you just kind of lose your mind just enough, you can kind of achieve the most incredible things by using the building blocks that are around you.
Yep.
And I think, that was kind of the spirit of me as a little girl, right? I just kind of thought, just hearing is like, oh no, this can't be like this and this means that, and it's just like, well, just why? Why
Yeah.
does it need to be that way? So when I was in zero gravity during the Aurelia flight, I do think that was like coming around the full circle,
Hmm.
from being like bedridden for years to like all of this crazy, hard, weird art experiments to just being like, oh wow, look at that. You don't need to go very far to literally be in a completely alternative reality,
Yeah.
right? Just nothing like, where everything is completely different,
Right, right,
and
right.
you don't even have to be on a trip for that.
Right. I love that. A different way of losing your mind just a little. What a beautiful image there. So we should wrap up. I was actually gonna ask you sort of what your sort of big far out vision is for the future of being human, but I'm gonna leave that because I think this is a great place to stop. Just one final thing. Where do people go to find more of what you do and more about you and more of what's coming down the pike?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would say that, Instagram is a really great place to just kind of like view a lot of the different types of, what my life is like, and
Right.
what types of work that I do. LinkedIn is a really great place to find me and
Hmm.
has a lot more of a structured way of collaborations, institutions, and kind of, a more behind the scenes of really kind of how I work. And then there's also YouTube channel, which has a lot of the sort of video content and interviews and things like that. So yeah, kind
Yeah.
of kind of easy to find.
Great. Yes. Good. And I would strongly encourage people to check out the YouTube channel because some of your stuff really is quite mind blowing. One of the things that we didn't talk about, but I love, is the Rolls Royce ad, which blows me away every time I watch it. So that's a little teaser for people to go and search out the Rolls Royce reel there. Um,
Yeah, and I truly hope. I think that I sometimes it feels like maybe I'm keeping it vague of what does it all really mean. But
yeah.
I do think that ultimately it's down to an individual to meet wherever they are at of what does it mean to see
Yeah.
the type of work that I do.
Yeah, and to me that's so important. That's part of the process of art. It's co-creation where it's the viewer that brings as much to it as the performer. Victoria, thank you so much for this. This has been a fantastic conversation. As I said, we could have gone on for a long time, and I'm gonna have
To
to
be
have you back.
continued.
To be continued, yes. But that was wonderful. Thank you. So I'm going to wrap up. That's it for this episode of The Future of Being Human Unplugged. Again, massive thank you to Victoria, and a reminder to check out her work if you haven't done so already, as well as checking out the stuff she does, that iceberg below the tip. We will be back on March the 12th, just a couple of weeks away, with two more amazing guests to talk about scripting better futures through impact filmmaking, with a particular emphasis on Hollywood's role. So I have a couple of Hollywood folks here to explore that. That should be a fantastic conversation. Until then, enjoy the rest of the day.